So while before I let anybody leave, I think I have the stage and I have to make the most of it. And since Mr. Nath has already joined us, it's the absolute appropriate time to start our next session. And like I said, after that soulful discussion on everlasting memories, it's time to continue that very journey of revisiting and understanding the past, yet once again. For this enthralling session of investigating the past and understanding, we have with us the very prominent Mr. Aman Nath. May I please request you to join us on stage, sir? So while it's very difficult to kind of thread all together his tremendous journey, I'm still going to try to do that for our audience here. And, Mr. Nath is an Indian writer, hotelier, and an architectural restorer. He is the co-founder and co-chairman of the Nimrana Hotels chain. He is one of the founding members of INTAC, a heritage and conservation organization. Mr. Nath has authored 14 illustrated books on arts, history, and architecture, 2 of which have won national awards. For his contribution to tourism, Mr. Nath has won the Lifetime Achievement Award. So very proud and humbled to have you here with us, sir. Please. Sure, sir. Oh my goodness. So before I hand over the stage to sir, a little brief about his talk. And the talk that Mr. Nath is going to give to us today is about Lutyens Delhi, an area in New Delhi named after the British architect Sir Edwin Lutyens, who was responsible for much of the architectural design and building during the British Raj. For many of us, it may be the epitome of luxury, and many might view it as a harsh reminder of the past, symbolic of an oppressor. But what is it really? Let's find out in this talk with Mr. Nath. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here.
I think that Sanjana wanted to be kind because I didn't want to call this. I wanted, the introduction wasn't right at all. Because I actually am saying that Lutyens got credit for what he didn't do. So the topic that I had wanted to talk about was the false credits that Lutyens got. And you're going to be surprised, shocked, even horrified that everything you thought was done by Lutyens was actually not done by him at all. So, where do I begin? Okay, I'll begin like this. Once I was at a dinner, and at a farewell dinner for an ambassador, and somebody made a speech to say there are no good ambassadors or bad ambassadors, there are only lucky and unlucky ambassadors. And I think that is the truth about Edwin Lutyens, because he was during his own lifetime not known at all. He was a little fry who had just done a few country homes for the nobility in England, but he had married the right girl. The first Governor General of India was his father-in-law. So when the talk of a new capital was first aired, nobody knew about it except the King Emperor, the Governor General. Even the Queen wasn't told, because the King Emperor said to tell a lady is to tell the whole world. So they kept it very quiet. But this Governor General told his son-in-law, who was Edwin Lutyens, who was a young man aspiring to be an architect. So he was very clever, conniving, and perhaps thereby successful. So he wrote a letter to Baker, Herbert Baker, who was a big-time architect. He had designed Pretoria in South Africa, and which if those of you who have seen it or seen pictures of it, New Delhi is a copy of Pretoria. It has the same, like we have Vijay Chowk, it has the same sort of structure with pillars and so on. So Lutyens wrote a letter to Baker. I believe there is a commission in the offing. Shall we enter it together? So Baker is this big architect. He's got a big office and he's not really interested. He doesn't know that this was the biggest architectural commission since the building of Rome. So he said, okay, let's do it together. Okay, I can join it. So they enter this competition. It says Baker, Lutyens and party. So when they come to India, to New Delhi to survey this, I forget the exact figure, that Edwin Lutyens got, I think, 10 times or 8 times less the daily fare of this big architect called Baker. But now what follows, and I shall tell you about that, is that Lutyens gets into everything and keeps trying to demolish Baker till he gets a nervous breakdown and leaves India. And throughout his life and building, he had very bad press in England because, he was not known. He did strange pieces of architecture. But then, because he got into the right circle, then he got, Lord Byron wrote a book on him, and A.G.S. Butler, who used to write architectural review. And slowly, everybody started to, give him credit. But the most foolish among all this is us, the Indian government, because in 1972, there was an exhibition. I was out of college, and the British Council arranged an exhibition of Edwin Lutyens in Rabindra Bhavan, which is a fairly new building. And it just showed the plans of Delhi. And there was, after that, a cocktail at the British High Commission. In the 70s, we were still in awe of England. And so, what the English said, we listened to them. And somebody suggested something, and the level of the CPWD sort of man was also, somebody who had never been to a high commission or never had wine or champagne. So they lapped it up and called this Lutyens Bungalow Zone. Now, if I was to ask you, how many bungalows has Lutyens made in the Lutyens Bungalow Zone? You want to take a guess? Not Romy, because he knows. Does anybody know? 0. He's not made one single bungalow, and it's called Lutyens Bungalow Zone. So that's how foolish we are and ignorant we are about history. So let me take you a little bit on the architectural journey. So when they decide to build this capital, the first building that were built was the Under Secretariat, which is, I think, where Kejriwal and all sit. That's on the way to the university. And there was an architect called E. Montague Thomas who built that. He set the style for these bungalows because that is built with these Doric pillars. It's got white cupolas, it's all painted white, it has verandas, it has high ceilings, and all the things that are necessary for the climate that we have. Edwin Lutyens, at the end of his career, built only 4 bungalows, which are all inside the President's Secretariat. So one was for the President's personal secretary, one was for the military secretary, one was for the Surgeon General, and one was for the Controller General. These are the only 4 bungalows he made. Then he made Baroda House and Hyderabad House, which are around India Gate. And he designed India Gate and Rashtrapati Bhavan. That's it. How many of you have heard of Robert Torr Russell? Almost nobody would have heard of him. Okay, this man built 4,000 bungalows. He built Connaught Place. He built Eastern Court, Western Court. He built Safdarjung Airport. He built the Irving Stadium, which was then National Stadium, and now it's called, what's it called, after the hockey player, Dhyan Chand Stadium. Okay, so with such a long list, he's completely unknown. Baker made the North Block, the South Block, and he made 7 bungalows. And Lutyens, in his typical style of sense of humor, which was beyond sarcasm, because he's talking about the senior colleague who helped him get the commission to come here. He called them bungalows, with an exclamation mark. And so he goes on doing this. He's very insidious. And every time they have a disagreement, he goes running. The running meant goes by ship and meets the king emperor and the queen and makes a whole case for himself, and was able to influence them, although he was not always able to win. So one of the big debates that they had was about the slope of the slope to Rashtrapati Bhavan. So the original, his plan was that you could see the whole building from far away. But the suggested plan which was taken was one that you go up and you discover it. You see the dome and then you come up and there's a sense of discovery which didn't happen. And they were also meant to be tunnels from North Block to South Block, which were then called the secretariats. So so if you wanted to commute, you should have been able to go by tunnel, which didn't happen because Lutyens got diarrhea and he became very sick. He went back to England, and Baker then saw to it that these were not made because they were busy fighting with each other. Okay. So the other architects of whom you've never heard, I've actually done a book called Dome Over India for the President of India, which is a state gift of the President of India to all heads of state. It was briefly on the market, but then at one point the President said that their gift shouldn't be on the market. What one president gives another president is not something that you and I can exchange with each other. So it became off the market. But sometimes I hear that it appears on Amazon and you can buy it. So I'd just like to read the names of the architects for you. There's W.H. Nichols, C.G. and F.B. Blomfield, Walter Sykes George, Arthur Gordon Shoesmith, and Henry Mead. He built that Jaipur house, which is now the National Gallery of Modern Art. So, Lutyens Bungalow Zone, I already talked about it. So, actually, we have no business to call it Lutyens Bungalow Zone. First, because nobody can say Lutyens, they say Lutyens and etc. So, I was telling them that the title of the talk should be How Lutyens Looted History, because, that's exactly what has happened. We know nothing about it. And I have no personal grudge against him, I might say, but my book actually makes Lord Hardinge the hero. It's another Englishman. I'm not saying, there was a great Indian and there was this horrible man, because he said that the food of the Indians stinks. He said that our minds were very vile. He said that the Indian craftsmen had broken thumbs. I mean, how much more ungrateful can you be? They built all these buildings for him, and he says that they had broken thumbs. And he says that the Indian architecture has no merit. It's just like little pop-up things here and there. There is no architecture at all. He says architecture begins where the Taj Mahal ends. And I don't know what exactly that means. And Lord Hardinge sent him to see the architecture of India. He sent him to see the Mughal gardens in Kashmir. He sent him to see the Datia and Orcha, which is some of the finest architecture. He sent him to see Mandu. And he came back, and if you look at his notes, I did a very extensive research. It's a 150-page book. He says things like, Mandu, incidentally, there's a Jahaz Mahal in Mandu, which is slightly tapering, has a lot of arches, is the inspiration for the Rashtrapati Bhavan, which is long and narrow. And he was obsessed with leaving a mark in posterity. And he actually sadly succeeded, because he studied classical architecture. He traveled a lot to Italy, because Italy is where, the great classical the renaissance of the architecture happened. So the Doric column, for example, which is used in Rashtrapati Bhavan, it's supposed to be 8 times its width. There's a classical proportion to it. But he made it 14 times or 12 times, I don't remember now. He did whatever he wanted. And then when Baker's secretariats, and North Block and South Block started to rise, and Rashtrapati Bhavan was at the back, then he said, oh, my building isn't going to be seen. So he gets up in a balloon, because there were no drones those days, and he goes up somewhere near India Gate, and he says, oh gosh, I'm not going to be seen. So he decides then that the drum of the dome of Rashtrapati Bhavan should be raised. So he raised it. So it's a very long building, as you know, and I'm making you aware of this. So if you see it again or see pictures of it, you will realize how disproportionate and utterly ridiculous it is by architectural proportions, because the dome goes up 6 meters. So it's like the neck of a plucked chicken, and there's this dome sitting on top. But when you are there, you see it, because it's 2.5 times the base of the facade, which is not at all proportionate to any classical architecture. So in my book, I drew triangles, because I went to school and I know a little bit of geometry. And so when this book came out in England, there was a big thing, and the Lutyens Trust people came, and they attended, and Swaraj Pol released the book. And they said, how fantastic, Mr. Nath, we must get you to speak. I said, you must read the book first. And after they read the book, I never heard from them, because and then Outlook Traveler, somebody read the book thoroughly and said, would you do, it merits a cover story. So they did a cover story, and as it happened, the Lutyens Trust had brought all their, what are they called, donors and so on, to see New Delhi, and that was the cover story, which said Lutyens did nothing, So I think he did get a few slaps. Okay. So now I'll go through 7-8 things which make the city and make you aware of how he had no role to play in any of those. So when the site was being chosen, Lutyens said that it should be Malcha. Where Malcha Marg is, inside there is a ruined fort where the Begum of Rampur used to stay with her Alsatians. There were a lot of stories about that. It's a protected monument. So in the middle of the forest, Lutyens wanted to make this thing. And there was a man called, there was a committee of people. It was called Warden. One was called Ward, and one was called Gordon. They went around and they surveyed the land, and they said the current site, which is Raisina Hill, is appropriate, because then you can look down on the countryside. So the site was not chosen by him. In fact, he fought to say that he didn't want to build on this site, but the Governor General, who was Lord Hardinge, said, this is it, and he was the client. He said, I will get the blame if it's not right, and I will also get the credit. But unfortunately, he never got any credit, because he had only one, Lord Hardinge had one daughter who died during his lifetime. And Lutyens, as I said, was the lucky ambassador or architect. His son wrote a book on him. His daughter wrote a book on him. His great-grand-niece, Jane Ridley, wrote a book on him. And then there is also Candida Lutyens, who's, a young lady who came here. And so they made a whole cult around him. And we people, even though after the British had left, had a colonized psyche. So we were so busy lapping up everything that the Brits were giving us. I think it's finally come to an end now, which is good. Okay. The plan of New Delhi was actually, by all the scholars who've studied it, say it was a group effort. And when he was asked to plan New Delhi, he made a copy of New York, which was cross streets. And Lord Hardinge said to him in a letter, he said, I have lived in these parts and I know when a dust storm blows through, what's going to happen. What happens in New York on a windy, cold time, the cold air goes through your forehead because there's no stopping the wind. It runs through the whole city. So he said, I would like you to design a city which has rounds about and avenues of trees, so that, when this dust storm, we have 2 months of summer and dust storms blow, they would be cut by that. And that's what was done. He also gave him the map of Paris and of Washington and Canberra in Australia, and said, look at these maps. So what Lutyens does is he does a cut and paste job with, Australia is quite bad, so he let that be. But it was Charles L'Enfant, who was a French architect who designed Washington. So the whole story of the British was that they wanted to outdo France, because France had less colonies and less armies. Portugal had more gold, but England had, the crown in the jewel and so on. But they used to say in all their correspondence, we'll never have Paris, because, London is not Paris. So they decide to build Paris in New Delhi. So in all their correspondence, they are saying, this is the width of the Champs-Élysées, so Kingsway will be wider. Then, so it's not my invention, it's what they're aspiring to be. And in 1931, when the Rashtrapati Bhavan is ready, they have a big party. And what did they toast it? With champagne, which incidentally is French. And then the fountains play, and Lord Irwin says, this is what Versailles must have looked like. So the joke is that they never got over the complex, and that's what they were fighting. And eventually, okay, there are many things. I think I should go in a organized manner, otherwise I shall digress and not return to the point. About the gardens, Lutyens fought tooth and nail to make an English garden, which is with artless natural planting, like that. But he was sent to see the gardens in Kashmir. And in fact, the name of the Mughal gardens has now been changed, which was the right thing to do, because it was never called the Mughal garden. In all the drawings that Lutyens has done, he calls it a formal Indian garden. So this whole obsession with, I was at a lunch just now, and there were 2 German people, and they said, all the buildings that we see in Delhi are Mughal. I said, not at all. When we were near the Lodi garden, so there are Sultanate buildings which are pre-Mughal, and as you know from lots of WhatsApp University, that there were 50 dynasties who ruled more than 200 years in India, and we don't even know their names. We only just go back to the Mughals, who incidentally did destroy many buildings and built many things. Aurangzeb destroyed 1,200 temples in Vrindavan, Mathura, Agra, in that whole region, 1,200. And 2 twin towers come down and the whole world is alarmed about it. Anyway, that's another subject. The plinth of Rashtrapati Bhavan, because it was sitting squat on the ground, and there was an engineer called Swinton Jacob, who was less well-born and stylish, because, British engineers were engineers, they came in the service. So if you spoke better English or had a better education and knew how to talk with the Governor-General, who incidentally was also a bureaucrat, then he was given his tailcoat and 2 boys carried it, and we thought he was somebody, but he was dealing with Udaipur, Jaipur, Jodhpur, who had 1,200-year-old dynasties, and they were nobody, they were upstarts. So Neem Rana was a descendant of the Chauhans. So he refused to talk to them. He said, oh, these are upstarts. So and it was a big state, up till Nabha and Patiala and so on. So the British kept cutting Neem Rana and made it smaller and smaller, and made Alwar, for example, bigger, because Alwar used to take them on hunting expeditions, and they used to shoot 2,000 geese and come back and have champagne breakfast. So that is history, you know. Whoever has the power does what they want. So Swinton Jacobs said, this building is too squat, it needs to be raised, because then only will you see the, you know, the panoramic view and all that. So it was raised. So now those steps that you see, which gives it a certain stature or in the landscape, was Swinton Jacobs' idea. So the plan was a copy of Washington and Paris, which was French architects. The site was another Englishman. The plinth was Swinton Jacob. The planting. Now, when time came to plant the trees, Lutyens always had to be in disagreement with everybody. There was a wonderful man called Clutterbuck. Clutterbuck was the greatest horticulturist of India, and Lord Hardinge admired him greatly. He made a list of 72 Indian species of trees, and he said these should be grown here because they belong here, they would last here. So Lutyens again in all his meetings and correspondence said, I assure you that these trees will not last more than 10-15 years, because the ridge was barren at that point. So this planting was done, and now they were planted in 1912. So it's been more than 100 years, and Delhi, if you look at it from the sky, is very green. It has nothing to do with what Lutyens' prophecy was, that we would be a desert. And interesting enough, my maternal grandfather, he worked for the British government, 6 months in Delhi and 6 months in Simla. So he actually quoted for a tender to plant the trees, and it was him who planted all these jamun trees, and which when we drive through the, you know, what is Imperial Delhi, because I don't want to call it Imperial Delhi. Now, the architectural style. Lutyens believed that the only architecture that was worth its weight was Roman architecture. He said the round Roman arch is the only arch, all else is rubbish. So there are drawings of this in my book. He was in awe of the Church of Rome. So he made a proper sketch of the Church of Rome, and he said, I will build the Church of Rome at Raisina, and the Governor General will live in it, because it's an internal arrangement. I'll make bedrooms, bathrooms, whatever, and then so it will be. But Lord Hardinge said, but it has nothing to do with India. India is paying for this building, the Maharajas, the government, whatever taxes they took from us. So you must make a building which will make the Indians civilizationally proud of this building. So then he said there is no architecture in India, and he's forced to see all this. So eventually he does this cut and paste job. So the dome on top is the Sanchi Stupa, which is 3rd century BC. That is Buddhist. The drum of I told you, it's been raised 6 meters, but there are 4 chhatris on the side which are Islamic. Then there is the the floor I've said so already, yes. The chhajjas. There's a chhajja that runs along the whole thing, which is Rajasthani. The facade, which is linear, is Afghan, because it's from Mandu. But there are also strokes of genius. He does do something which works also. He takes all those kiosks, because we have in our palaces, we have little chhatris on top. So he writes in his notes that these are these useless things that serve no purpose. They do actually, because when you go to the terrace and it's sunny, you can stand under the chhatri. But he turns the chhatris around. So the dome of the chhatri then becomes a bowl, which were the fountains. So they are on top of Rashtrapati Bhavan fountains, and they did play very briefly. Then the plumbing got into trouble. And when there was a famine and Rajaji was the Governor General, he said, we have no business to live like this with fountains. We are not in Versailles, we are not an imperial person. He refused to sleep in the bed of this, Lord Mountbatten. There was a big bed. So he walked across to the other side. If the Rashtrapati Bhavan is facing you, it's a U shape. It goes like that. So this is the side where the Governor General used to stay, if you are India Gate side. So Rajaji, the little man in a dhoti, who looked like the second Gandhi, walked across to the other side and he found more sensible rooms. He said, I want to stay here. And those were the rooms for the maids in waiting, because the Governor Generals were very young. They used to come with little kids. So the ayahs used to stay that side. So Rajaji decided to sleep in the ayah's room because he said, we are common people. And all the presidents have thereafter slept in the ayah's rooms, And everybody doing their own thing. Gyani Zail Singh said, I want to put my Guru Granth Sahib. So he broke an arch and made a room for the Guru Granth Sahib. Shankar Dayal Sharma said, I want to have a havan. So they made a havan kund in the veranda. He used to have havans and feed bananas to the monkeys. Till Narayanan came and was having breakfast with his wife alone. He said, can I not have so much staff around me? So they were sent off. And the monkeys came and came and they pounced on them, and then they screamed and shouted and ran inside because he was the president of India attacked by monkeys. So then the CPWD comes in and makes a hole. All those pillars are grilled now. You've got metal jollies along all of them, just because one president did havans over there. So we have lots of stories. Actually, the real book that I should do is the book, the text that isn't in the subtext, which is not in the book, because that's about the stories of how the Giris, took away the carpets, and how even when I wrote the book, in Gold Market, there was a restaurant saying Rashtrapati Bhavan ka khana. So I told the president, that food from the Rashtrapati Bhavan is sold there. He said, no, he found out. So what was happening was, when you go to meet the president, they come with these kamar buns and, safas, and they bring big trays, samosas and sandwiches, and all of us, first we had a little bit of a formal setting, so we normally gobble, gobble, gobble. So we say no, 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 and all that food then goes out from the back door and is sold in, So it was. And I was told about the unpaid bills of some of the president's wives, who used to go shopping and say, yes, yes, we shall pay you, and they were never paid, Okay. So then there is, so if you look at the facade of Rashtrapati Bhavan, the Buddhist thing, the Islamic Chhatris, then you've got a Roman Palladian floor, which is those round arches, and below that, which is the side from, if you go from Vasant Vihar side, you would enter from the side where the staff used to enter from. And they called that the native entrance, because that was for Nokar Chakar. So that was in native architecture. So Elephanta and Ellora is that architecture. So they've got very stout pillars which are like elephant legs, and they've got, they look a bit scary and dark because you get into the underground. And then, because at this point he's doing this great commission, and Baker has been sent off because he's got a nervous breakdown dealing with him, then he starts to have great visions of entering Have I spoken too much? No, enjoying you are, but maybe there's something else to happen. Yes. Okay. So he says that I shall now make the Delhi order. So we have the Corinthian, the Tuscan, the Doric, all these, which are orders of the pillars. The pillars are fairly the same. But on top, on the capital, even if you're not a student of architecture, it goes like this and it goes like that, because the round becomes a square on top, which holds the building. So he decides to make the Delhi order, in which he puts 4 ghantis, bells. They are bells. They're clapperless bells because they don't ring. So there are 4 bells. So instead of this form, because it's supposed to take that, his thing goes like, because the bells are sticking out, they go like this and then it goes inwards. So it's all wrong. But because when you're in power and you think there's nobody better than you, then you're much more likely to make mistakes. And 16 years after this was built, they were gone. So everybody said that these bells were actually designed to toll the death knell of the British Empire more than anything else. And nobody ever spoke about this Delhi order. When we talk about the materials used, Edwin Lutyens again fought a great battle because he wanted it to be like the Taj Mahal. He wanted it in white marble. He wanted it like Victoria Memorial, which is also a cenotaph to the British Empire. So, but he didn't succeed because, somebody did say, why white? It's so stark, etc. So the geological department came up with stones. They brought Karoli stone, which is red, Dholpur stone, which is lighter, and they were then used in two colors. And some of the good architecture that we are seeing these days is actually, going back to this. And this whole central vista thing that happened, and people said that we were going to touch the work of some genius. First, he was no genius. Secondly, he everything that we imagine he did, he didn't do. He also wanted to make, because their role model was the Champs-Élysées. So he wanted to make palaces, where all those Nirman, Bhavan and all are. Lutyens had planned that there would be palaces. And they had said, we'll get Jaipur, Jodhpur, Udaipur, all these people, and because they were competing with each other, and they were the Arabs of the moment, they were going to Europe and buying silver beds and Christophe, all these things. So they thought that it would be very spectacular to have all ththese palaces, and then an ordinary man who's a bureaucrat will walk, drive through this on 16-horse carriage as the Governor General's representative. But then they had a meeting, and they said, beware, because this is what happened in Versailles. When you get all the kings together, what will they do? They have nothing to do. We've cut off their fingers. We've cut off their powers. They'll only have parties and plot against us. So it's better to keep them in their kingdoms far away, not talking to each other, and not planning any mischief against us. Also, friends of Lutyens wrote that it was such an amazing modernist building, which it is far from, because only 30 years after the building of Rashtrapati Bhavan, Chandigarh was made by Corbusier. And the reason for that choice was first that Nehru didn't want a British architect. We just got rid of them. So he said, let's get somebody else. So they had got an American architect and his assistant who were to design Chandigarh. But those were days when they were terrified. I mean, they thought that, COVID was all over the place even then. So they wouldn't come to India because they thought they die of food poisoning, they die of malaria, they die of dysentery. So only the assistant of that American used to come and go. But he died suddenly, so that American then said, I'm not going to do it. So Nehru was back to zero, and then he found Corbusier, and because he was Swiss-French, he said, it's okay, it's a good slap in the face of the British, let's have him. So that was modernism, which is also totally inappropriate for our climate, because, it's concrete, it roasts up, all that. But that was chosen, and there's Frank Lloyd Wright in America, if you're talking of modernism, who is building, the most amazing buildings in glass and in grids which are very modern. So, I think I have spoken enough. More? Okay. No, so I actually, the government does what it must do, but I had once proposed to the government, this government, or one before it actually, to say that we should forget Lutyens, because he was a horrible man, and he's thought very low of us, so we have no business to honor a man who called us, all the rotten things he called us. But Lord Hardinge was not such a bad guy, because what happens is the World War breaks out, and they say no budget, no city. We're perfectly okay in Calcutta, forget about Delhi. So he goes, because he was playing the client's role here, and he wanted to enter posterity in his own way. So he goes to meet the King Emperor, and he says to him that in the Darbar of Delhi, you had promised your subjects that you would give them a capital. He said, yes. He said, but the King Emperor never goes back on his word to his subjects. So he blackmailed him into saying, you jolly well build New Delhi. So he said, but there are no funds. He said, that, sir, is our job. So then they wangled funds like all bureaucrats do. They put army funds, and they said the entourage of a king will come. So in the president of the state will make 12 houses, because the entourage of the Shah of Iran is big. So they build those. And they put it under different heads, because the council is only getting it right under different heads, you know. So it was Hardinge who did that and saw that New Delhi was through. So now that Subhash Chandra Bose stands there, it would be nice maybe to put Hardinge at his feet at least, you know, a little statue, you know, proving both the points and acknowledging history, because without him, there wouldn't have been a New Delhi. Yes, I think that is all. I could speak much longer, but... So you do know that the title that you chose was not right. It was supposed to say the false credit that Lutyens got, and you said that all those wonderful things he did.
Not at all, sir.
Okay.
We stand happily corrected.
Okay.
And I acknowledge we stand happily corrected. And thank you for that absolutely wonderful lesson. And I think we should all now start a petition to not call it the Lutyens Delhi. And we should also call it revisiting a past which is not Lutyens Delhi. Would that be all right, sir?
A Vasant Vihar petition.
A Vasant Vihar petition for that. So I think we should put our hands together to that petition. Thank you so much, Mr. Nath, to be here. And Sanjana is going to present him with a token of our thanks and appreciation. Thank you. And you want a picture? Yes, please.
Okay, with that man.
And all of us. Thank you.
I'll be in the middle. We'll come here.
Yeah, that's better.
Because they left it.